On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we project the starting lineup, the rotation, how many minutes is every player going to get after KU added Nginyu Ngala for their 13th edition.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are updating our second version of the Kansas Jayhawks basketball starting lineup, minutes rotation, whatever you want to call it, projection. This latest edition after Nginyu Ngala, the Canadian guard, comes over to Kansas. How does that affect the rotation? We'll get into all that, and then we'll finish up with the latest news on today's episode of the show. Let's start with the starting lineup. So since we last talked, as far as minutes rotation, starting lineup projection, the lone addition, you would say, is Nginyu Ngala. And Noah Shelby was not somebody who was projected to be, in competition for the starting lineup. So, losing him doesn't have an impact on that. And adding Nginyu Ngala, that doesn't have an impact to me in terms of who's going to be in the starting lineup. Now, Bill Self gave this quote, when referring to the addition, just the other day about Nginyu Ngala. He said, we had one roster spot remaining, and we thought we addressed the need in that now we have a backup point guard who we feel is very capable with his maturity and skill set to play minutes on our team. Nginyu is quick, he can shoot, and he should be a great example, not only on the court how to play, but also in the locker room. And so a couple things there. One, we had one roster spot remaining. That kind of tells you, okay, they're not going to fill the 14th scholarship spot. They're going to play with 13, which means this minutes projection, this lineup projection, okay, we can go forward with this being the final group of players, this being the final roster for KU. That, that on its own makes it helpful. But, him talking about, he said, now we have a backup point guard. It is interesting, though, he did say to play minutes on our team. But also later he says, in the locker room, because can both go both ways. Like, just playing minutes just mean he's going to get on the floor for some amount of minutes, or does it mean consistent minutes? But as far as the starting lineup projection where we start this off, no, I do not have Nginyu Ngala as part of that conversation. I think the conversation is same where it was when we last talked about it. It's like, okay, Floyd Badunga is a lock to be a starter at center. Darryn Peterson is a lock to be a starter as basically your one on offense, but probably like your three on the defensive end of the floor. From there, it's like, okay, Trey White is probably as close to a lock as possible because you don't have a lot of other wings, and like he's going to be a jack of all trades and be a good rebounder. Trey White's going to be in the starting lineup. The two that I have questions on are going to be your other guard spots. Is it going to be Melvin Council, Elmarko Jackson, or Jayden Dawson? Seemingly mostly between those three players, which two emerges? Now, there is a scenario where like Cole Rosario just balls out so well, and that Bill Self appreciates that he has this guard who's really good at rebounding and is a good athlete and can shoot threes. And Bill Self goes, you know what? I'm kind of interested in having you in the starting lineup as a complementary piece to these other guys. But until we get more, I guess, from practice and that sort of emergence, to me, it's between those three guys, again, until that happens. So then you're between Jayden Dawson, Elmarko Jackson, and Melvin Council, three players for two starting spots. From a standpoint of, being the best complement with being the best three-point shooter, that would be Dawson adding into the lineup. But if we're just talking about, Bill Self guys, like, I don't know, Melvin Council maybe tops that list because of his style of play and his defensive ability. And then Elmarko Jackson has the experience in the system, and it sounds like he's doing well during off-season basketball. So honestly, I feel like I would have Melvin Council as, if I was ranking like who am I most confident in is going to be a starter. 1 would be Peterson, 2 would be Flory, 3 would be Trey White, and all of them would be, very high confidence meter. And then 4 would be Melvin Council. And then 5 right now, I would have Elmarko Jackson. But again, I could see a world where, it ends up being Jayden Dawson. And again, I think that's where the competition is going to be. If you want to throw Cole Rosario into having a chance of that, then sure, I can totally see into that. From there, we get into a conversation of who's in the rotation, not just the starting lineup. Okay, so if we're talking Jayden Dawson, is in the starting lineup competition. If he ends up going to the bench, boom, he becomes your sixth man. You need a backup center as part of the projected rotation. Who's going to get the backup center minutes when Flory Badunga is not on the floor? And that's where Paul Mbia steps in for me. Now, is there a chance that Bryson Tiller can beat out Paul Mbia as the backup 5 and that Tiller could maybe get minutes at the 4 and the 5? Yes, that is a possibility. Like, I'm not just going to throw away that a guy who, is basically a 4 or 5 star recruit couldn't come in and show that potential and eventually earn that spot. I do think Mbia is the favorite to win that spot, and so that's who I'm going to go for that position, at least as of now. Kind of the same thing with Cole Rosario. It's like, if we get to, September and you're hearing good things about over and over again, or we get to October, late night in the fog, and you keep hearing good things about Cole Rosario, or you keep hearing good things about Bryson Tiller, maybe we have a new conversation about what that means, and if those spots are more up for grabs than you might think. Paul Mbia would be that other man in the rotation. Now, when you look back to past years under Bill Self, the majority of the time, and it depends how you view what is the rotation. Do you view the rotation as minutes per game, like guys playing 8 or 10 or 12 minutes per game or more? Do you view it as guys playing a specific amount of games? Or do you view it as a total amount of minutes, where it's like a combination of games played and minutes? Or do you view it as when, it's time for the NCAA tournament, the most is on the line, how many guys are going to be in the rotation? Because based on how you view that is how you view building the rotation. So for instance, and this is something that I've done, some research on, and we shared on a show last year. I don't know if the everydayers remember this, but like talking about those different areas. So like if you are looking, for instance, at, minutes per game, if you're looking at 10 plus minutes per game on a KU basketball team under Bill Self as the cutoff to say you were part of the rotation. Well, you wind up with, on average, under Bill Self teams, they average about 8 guys who average that many. So that's what I'm going to kind of go with guys who are averaging 10 or more minutes per game. So then we get to our 8th man, and that becomes maybe somebody who is averaging close to 10 minutes per game. And then you have a conversation between, okay, could it be Tiller, right? You could maybe get some minutes at the 5. You could get him some minutes at the 4, playing next to Flory and or Paul Mbia. It could be a guy like Cole Rosario, who we just talked about at the top, somebody who could play probably the 2 and the 3 for you and could shoot threes coming off the bench. And we know this team is going to be in need of 3-point shooting, so it certainly makes sense for him. I think Samice Calderon is going to be in that conversation too. I think Bill Self's going to like the athleticism. And I think something that Calderon has going his way is his length, and on a team that doesn't have a lot of other true wings, like Corbin Allen might be a redshirt candidate. And if you're redshirting him, the only wings on your roster would be Trey White and Samice Calderon from like a traditional wing standpoint. And so then if you want to play a specific way with your wings, Calderon becomes maybe the favorite for that 8th man spot in that specific situation. I think this is where we'd have to throw Nginyu Ngala, the newest addition for KU. Okay, can he compete for that 8th man role? Jamari McDowell would be the other one as part of that competition. If I was having to guess right now, I would say Tiller, Calderon, and Rosario. Those 3 are the ones I'm more focusing in on, but you do include, Ngala and McDowell into that conversation as well. Now, if you are talking closer to like games played, as far as on average for how many players play 95% or more of the games in a season for Bill Self, it's closer to 7. If you're talking 90% or more, it's closer to 7.5. So that's where you get into a situation, especially once you get to the NCAA tournament, where it's like NCAA tournament games with 10 or more minute per game players. KU has had, only 4 games under Bill Self prior to last year with 9 or more players playing 10 plus minutes per game, versus he's had 11 games in his NCAA tournament career where only 6 players have played 10 or more minutes per game. So point being, once you get to the NCAA tournament, the rotation is probably going to be 7. And I feel like we know what that 7 is going to be right now, right? It's Peterson, Jackson, Council, White, Badunga, Mbia, and Dawson. Like, that's your 7. Now, again, maybe there's a world where Tiller eventually beats out Mbia. Maybe there's a world where Rosario, beats out Dawson or something come the NCAA tournament. It's also possible this is one of those teams, because Bill Self has had about little over 20% of the time, his NCAA tournament games has 8 guys playing 10 or more minutes per game. Maybe this is one of those teams that fits into that. But I do think that's where the rotation is right now. What about how we allocate the minutes? We'll get to that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. And today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop is a great way where if you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. They have all sorts of flavors too. If you go to the website, you can see the tropical variety pack. You can see watermelon, which I don't know, I always find delicious during the summer months for some reason. They got berry, and guess what? They even got sugar-free. So you got sugar-free. They're into that. If you want it. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard with Drip Drop. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, previewing the Kansas lineup rotation, minutes projections, our 2.0 version. We'll get some latest news here in a second. Also, don't forget, you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. Okay, so going into these specific minutes, we went over our rotation, how we have an 8-man rotation, right, and why some of the past history shows that to be the case with Peterson, Jackson, Council, White, and Badunga starting, Dawson and Bia. And then I went with Rosario as the 8th man specifically just because the 3-point shooting and the value of having, if you have Dawson and Rosario as 2 of your maybe 3 best 3-point shooters, it makes sure that you have one of those guys on the floor for a majority of the game if you're adding minutes both ways. And then if Peterson's your other good 3-point shooter, he'll be out there enough that you should be able to be good there. So how we have the minutes logged out, we have Darryn Peterson getting 35 minutes, all of those at the point guard spot. Now, it is interesting because Peterson is somebody who offensively will probably be the point guard for Kansas. He'll be handling the ball majority of the times, but there'll probably be certain actions where they do have, Elmarko Jackson or Melvin Council handling the ball and Peterson playing off ball. I think a majority of the time Peterson will have the ball in his hands, but sometimes that'll give him a rest, or sometimes they'll give him an opportunity to show what he can do off the ball as well to, NBA scouts. But I think on the defensive end, Peterson will be guarding threes. So sometimes people say you are what you guard. And from that perspective, Peterson will probably be closer to a 3 on this year's team. But for the offensive purpose, we have him getting 35 minutes at the 1. Now, it doesn't really matter, honestly, between the 1 through the 3. I think you could almost view it as, instead of just, 40 minutes to give out at the 1, 40 minutes to give out at the 2, 40 minutes to give out at the 3. I think you could honestly probably view this as, just 120 minutes to give out between the 3 guard spots, knowing that, again, Peterson is sort of a 1, sort of a 3, knowing that Council and Elmarko Jackson, that their minutes are going to be pretty, it doesn't really matter if they're playing the 2 or the 3, knowing that Jayden, Dawson, and Cole Rosario could play the 2 or the 3. It just depends on what other guards are out there with you. Those minutes are kind of just synced together in a very real way. But we have Peterson getting 35 minutes there. We have Elmarko Jackson getting 23 minutes. Playing at the 2, but again, if technically he's the 3, whatever. Melvin Council we have getting some minutes as the backup 1, as the backup 2, and the starting 3. Again, it kind of can run together in any way you want to put it together, but we have Council for 30 minutes per game. And then those backup guard spots, we have Jayden Dawson getting some minutes at the 2, Jayden Dawson getting some minutes at the 3. So he's playing 22 minutes. That's close to Elmarko Jackson's 23 minutes, which kind of signifies the coin flip that I think it is for who's going to be the starter between the 2. And then we have Cole Rosario getting 10 minutes per game at the 3. I went into this wanting to get Cole Rosario even more minutes because I do feel like he's going to be somebody that Bill Self really likes, between his hustle plays, between his rebounding ability for guard, between his ability to shoot threes, but be a good athlete. I think Bill Self's going to like him in a lot of ways. And I wanted to get him up to, Christian Braun his freshman year, I think was closer to 18 minutes per game. And that's actually somebody that he kind of comped him to, but Christian Braun being bigger, I would have loved to get Cole Rosario up to 15 minutes per game. The problem is, how do you do it? Who are you taking 5 minutes away from, right? Maybe you take 2 away from Darryn Peterson so he's not as fatigued. Do you get him down to 33? You get Jayden Dawson down to 20. You get Elmarko to 22. That'd be 5 minutes. Or you shave Melvin Council down to 26 or something. There are ways you can do it. But, right now I have Cole Rosario at 10. And then in the front court, we have Trey White getting all of his minutes at the 4. Theoretically, Trey White is a player that can play the 3 for a team. But given that Kansas doesn't have a lot of obvious candidates to play the 4, and given that they do have so many guards that are going to be eating up those minutes 1 through 3, I think it just makes sense that Trey White gets all of his minutes at the 4. I have him for 28 minutes there. You could convince me for 30 or 32, given the scarcity at the position for KU. From there, we have Floyd Badunga as the backup 5, or as the starting 5, playing 25 minutes per game. That leaves 15 minutes at the backup 5. That leaves 12 minutes at the backup 4. We have Paul Mbia going for 12 minutes per game as the backup 5. You could convince me that's all 15 for Paul Mbia, or maybe it's 14, right? You could also convince me it's 8 to 10, depending how raw he is. So we went with 12 for Mbia. And then that leaves us with those backup third string center minutes, which 3 available, and then 12 minutes available at the 4. And what we did here, we didn't specifically give them to a player because, again, going back to the idea that typically the rotation is about 8 men deep for Bill Self, what we did is we gave it to spot minutes, because what I mean by rotation is 8 deep is those are the guys that are consistently playing. But a lot of games, there is a 9th man that ends up playing for Bill Self. It's just some games that 9th man is different than others. Some games that 9th man might be playing 10 minutes. Some games they might be playing 2. Some games they might not play at all. It's just going to kind of depend on the matchup. How'd you practice that week? Do you have a hot hand? There's a lot of things, like, did you come in for the first 2 minutes of the game and you performed well to earn more minutes? Or did you come in and make a mistake and then you're done for the game, right? That's kind of the line you live on when you're like the 9th man. And so that's why we give it to spot minutes. We're 15 spot minutes per game. That might sound like a lot, but that's kind of in range with where it is per, for Bill Self teams, that you have around 15 spot minutes. Sometimes it ends up being closer to 10 to 15 in that range per game. So you can kind of divvy that out however you want for a specific game, right? You could say some of the spot minutes go to, okay, Paul Mbia is playing 15 minutes this game. Now there's 12 spot minutes available, right? You could say Trey White's playing 31 minutes this game. Now, again, there's 12 spot minutes available. You could say Bryson Tiller's playing 10 minutes in a given game, and those are 10 of the 15 spot minutes. You could say Smeece Calderon's going to play 15 minutes. You could say Smeece Calderon's going to play 8 spot minutes, and then the other 7 spot minutes are going to go to Cole Rosario, or 8 of the spot minutes are going to go to Bryson Tiller, and 7 of them are going to go to Smeece Calderon. That's kind of the area where it's not a consistent, you're going to get minutes every game as part of the rotation, but it's something that I don't think we always account for. I think we like to make it as easy as like, oh no, it's just going to be the 8 guys in the rotation. They're going to get up all the minutes. That's not how it works realistically, right? And technically the spot minutes doesn't have to be a game-to-game thing. It could be a total minutes type of thing where it's like, okay, this player, filled in for somebody else who was injured, and they wound up playing X amount of minutes with it, which if you divide by the amount of games that the KU played over the course of the season equals 7 minutes per game, even though, their average is 10 minutes per game because they didn't play in every game. It averages out to 7 minutes per game for the season. And that's kind of why I like to leave some room for spot minutes, that like it can be for a myriad of different things over the course of the season. And so I think those guys, Tiller, Calderon, Ngala, and McDowell would be part of the spot minutes and the spot rotation for KU. All right, we're going to finish up here on Locked On Jayhawks, talking a little of the latest news. This is LOJ. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget, you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for a second listen every day. Also, don't forget to go check out the Phil Steele Kansas Jayhawks football preview that we did on Tuesday's show. You can find that again anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. And make sure you're subscribed to the show. We got to get that thing up to 4K for the start of football season. We're running out of time here. We only got a couple more weeks, so please subscribe. Tell a friend, tell a sibling to subscribe. Okay, some of the latest news, we went over what Bill Self had to say about Nginyu Ngala, which certainly was interesting there. But some other KU basketball, I guess, news, recruiting news. Sayon Keita, who is the top center in the class of 2027, he's visiting KU. Now, he's set to visit, it's like 6 schools, and it's going to be happening kind of rapid fire here. But I think interesting for a couple of reasons. One, Keita is somebody who is rumored that maybe he could reclassify to the class of 2026, which would make him maybe the top center for 2026 as well. He is for 2027. And for Kansas, you continue to go into the season like, okay, this could be Floyd Badunga's last season. And yes, in an ideal world, Paul Mbia is so good off the bench that, come 2026, that offseason, we're like, oh, I feel great about Paul Mbia being the starting center. But you still want to load up. You still want to have other good options to have for you there, right? And you still want to at least keep your options open. But beyond that, it is at least interesting because obviously with the Bill Self health stuff, and obviously with questions of, okay, will this be Bill Self's last year? Or is he going to be coaching for, a handful more years, whatever it's going to be? It obviously is interesting that they're still recruiting for the future, right? Now, I don't know. I guess, would you ever really, that'd be very interesting. Like, has a coach ever just been like, no, I'm just not going to recruit? And then everybody's like, oh, look, clearly he's done after this year. He just decided not to recruit anybody. Maybe part of it is just you want to leave the school in good hands. But I do find it interesting because, I don't know, maybe it's also from a standpoint of like, maybe in your head you go, hey, maybe I'm going to retire at the end of this year, but what if I change my mind? I better have, options to go to recruit. So it is interesting that news came out shortly after, I guess days after, whatever, the Bill Self health stuff. I also wanted to make mention, last thing here, the Locked On College Football Top 100 released for the top 100 football players. No KU players were on the list. Now, I will say it's probably not the most complete list you could ask for. Basically, how the sausage was made. There was a reliability on hosts to pick. Like, there were certain players who you might go to like a preseason college football magazine, or you might look at an early NFL draft board, and they weren't even nominees to be ranked in the top 100. So that on its own. Second of all, I think it's fair from a standpoint of like, I'm not going to be up in arms about Kansas not having somebody in the top 100, because think about it from a national perspective. It's like, okay, and I've had these conversations even like, who is KU's best player? And I think the answer is Bryce Foster. I think EA Sports College Football 26 has Bryce Foster as KU's highest rated player. And if your highest rated player is a center coming off a team in which you went 5-7, it's going to be hard to be like, for somebody nationally to be like, hey, we're going to rank these guys in the top 100. So like, I get it. I don't even think it's necessarily the other part is there's not that obvious pick. Now, as we know, we talk about the team, locally and daily and stuff here. If you're asking me to project, will Kansas have a top 100 player or more by the end of the season? I would say yes. I have no problem with there not being one right now, just because they're not the obvious candidate. And like for instance, okay, Jalen Daniels is somebody that I could see being on the top 100 by the end of the season. But I can understand why he's not there right now, right? The first 5 games last year were rusty. He was shaking off the rust. Now, if we see the Jalen Daniels that we saw over the last 7 games last year and the bigger sample size that we saw in 2022 and 2023 and in the end of 2021, he'll be a top 100 player by the end of the year. Emmanuel Henderson is somewhere where it's like, I couldn't get myself to put him in the top 100. Like, there's a lot of good players in college football because he only has 5 career catches. But if you're asking me to project, could Emmanuel Henderson be a top 100 player by the end of the year because he has an 800, 900,000 yard receiving season at KU? Yeah, I kind of think that's going to happen, right? So it's like, there's a difference between, sometimes the top 100 lists end up being more about the respect that's earned over previous seasons versus what will be the top 100 list at the end of the year. And so I think at the end of the year, Kansas could and very well, should have some players, or at least a player on the top 100 list. But I can understand why it wouldn't be the case right now. And then you add into that it's like, yeah, you have uncertainty. You have players who transferred in who I think are going to be good for Kansas and play big roles. But it's like, it's hard to vote on that when you're comparing it to somebody who maybe has been at another school and was all ACC first team last year. It's just hard to have that argument right now at this point of the season. So if you're asking me realistically, will Kansas have one of the 100 best players in college football? Yes, I think they will. But I can understand why there's not, one on the list represented, I guess, right now. In the same way that, like, we have that was another episode we did recently, so check that out. Thank you, Everyday or so already did. But like, who's the third best player on KU basketball? It's like, well, I think by the end of the season, you're going to be like, yeah, that third best player is a good player. But right now, you're just like, I just don't really know who it is. It could be this player, it could be that player. So a little bit of logistics. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.